Where's my daughter? And I'm yelling, Mom, I'm here.
Evil does not erupt from darkness in an obvious way. Sometimes it grows quietly in the corners of ordinary lives, unnoticed until it is far too late. The women you are about to meet were daughters, friends, caregivers, partners. They were woven into the fabric of everyday life, trusted by the people who should have feared them most. Their crimes were not random explosions of rage, but calculated betrayals, acts that shattered families and communities. This is a journey through some of the most disturbing female killers of modern times, each one leaving a trail of devastation impossible to forget. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe so you never miss the next story. Also, tell me where you are watching from. October 24, 2000, Indianapolis, Indiana. The air was cool that evening when 21-year-old Sarah Jo Pender stepped out of the small house she shared with her boyfriend, Richard Hull, and their roommates, Andrew Cataldi and Tricia Nordman. Tension had been growing for weeks inside that home. Arguments about money, drug use, and loyalty. Everyone felt the pressure building, but no one understood how close it was to erupting into violence. Earlier that day, Sarah and Hull had driven to Walmart, where she legally purchased a shotgun he could not buy himself due to his criminal record. She later said she believed he needed it for protection. Prosecutors would claim it was the first step in a deadly plan. Whatever the truth, the gun would become the center of a tragedy no one could undo. That night, while Sarah was out walking, Hull confronted Cataldi about money owed by Hull's sister. According to Hull, the argument escalated, Cataldi moved toward the shotgun, and Hull fired. The blast killed Cataldi almost instantly. Nordman screamed. Hull turned the gun on her and shot her as well. When Sarah returned, the bodies were already on the floor. Hull was panicked, frantic, and begged her to help him. Fear, shock, and loyalty collided inside her. Instead of calling police, she helped move one of the bodies to a borrowed truck. They drove only a short distance before placing the bodies in a dumpster. Sarah went to work the next morning, as if nothing had happened, but evidence lingered, bloodstains in the house, inconsistencies in their stories. Within days, investigators connected Hull to the crimes. He confessed, but his version shifted repeatedly, especially when it came to Sarah's involvement. At first, he shielded her. Later, he blamed her. Eventually, he produced a handwritten confession letter, supposedly written by Sarah, describing how she killed the roommates after snapping, but Hull later admitted he forged the letter. He said he did it to lighten his own sentence, copying her handwriting with help from another inmate. Prosecutors still use the letter as evidence of manipulation, either by her or him, arguing that the surrounding deception showed Sarah had a deeper role than she claimed. The defense countered that Hull was abusive, violent, and capable of framing her to protect himself. The physical evidence, however, did not place Sarah in the room when the murders occurred. No fingerprints on the gun, no DNA linking her to the shots fired. Her guilt would rest entirely on her actions afterward, helping hide bodies, staying with Hull, lying to police, and continuing daily life without reporting the crime. At trial, neither Hull nor Sarah testified. Prosecutors portrayed her as the mastermind, comparing her to Charles Manson in her supposed ability to influence others. They argued she was the one who motivated Hull, bought the weapon, and cleaned up the aftermath. The defense argued she was a frightened young woman manipulated by a volatile man with a history of violence. On August 22, 2002, Sarah was convicted of 2 counts of murder and sentenced to 110 years in prison. Hull, who pled guilty earlier, received 130 years. Over the years, Sarah's case has become one of the most debated convictions in Indiana. Supporters argue she was punished not for pulling the trigger, but for failing to act afterward. A moral failing, not a murder. Critics say her involvement was far deeper, pointing to the gun purchase and the cleanup, arguing she played an essential role in enabling the killings. The truth sits somewhere in the uncomfortable space between fear and responsibility. She did not shoot the victims, that much is certain. But she did help hide their bodies. She did lie for Hull. She did participate in covering a crime so violent it forever changed the families of Cataldi and Nordman. And that ambiguity, the question of whether she was a manipulator or manipulated, continues to shadow her case more than 2 decades later. But while Sarah Pender's story raises questions about influence, loyalty, and the choices made in moments of fear, the next case strips away all ambiguity. In just 3 years' time, in a quiet Texas suburb, another teenage girl would commit one of the most brutal murders in high school history, not out of panic, but out of jealousy and rage that erupted with catastrophic force. July 18, 2003. Clear Lake City, Texas. The summer air was thick and bright that afternoon when two teenage girls, Tiffany Rowell and Rachel Kolarudis, relaxed inside Tiffany's home with Tiffany's boyfriend Marcus Priscilla and his cousin Adalbert Sanchez. They were young, hopeful, and living the ordinary rhythms of a warm July day. None of them knew that their lives were about to collide with the darkest impulses of someone they once considered a friend. 17-year-old Christine Marie Paolilla lived only minutes away. Her childhood had been marked by insecurity, illness, and bullying. When she was very young, alopecia stripped her of her hair, leaving her wearing wigs that classmates mocked. Her early school years were filled with humiliation and isolation. Everything changed when she met Tiffany and Rachel. The two girls took Christine under their wings. They helped her choose better wigs, taught her how to dress, and encouraged her to embrace confidence. They transformed her from an insecure, anxious teenager into someone who felt noticed, liked, even admired. That year, her classmates voted her Miss Irresistible, a title that filled her with pride. But Christine's emotional world was unstable. When she met 21-year-old Christopher Snyder, her life began to spiral. Snyder supplied her with drugs, pulled her into a toxic relationship, and fed her deep insecurities. Christine grew jealous, paranoid, volatile. Snyder's family called her the Psycho, warning others about her unpredictability. When Tiffany and Rachel tried to distance Christine from Snyder's influence, Christine interpreted their concern as betrayal. Her dependency on Snyder escalated. He introduced her to heroin. Her sense of reality blurred beneath addiction and obsession. On the afternoon of July 18, Christine and Snyder drove to Tiffany's house. Christine later told investigators they went to buy drugs, but witnesses, evidence, and the brutality of what happened next suggested otherwise. Inside the house, Snyder argued with Marcus. The tension erupted, guns were drawn, and within moments, bullets flew through the living room. Christine fired as well, not wildly, but deliberately. Tiffany and Rachel were shot repeatedly, including multiple wounds to the crotch area, a forensic hallmark of personal resentment and deep-seated jealousy. One girl attempted to crawl away, still alive. Christine approached her and beat her with the gun until she stopped moving. The overkill stunned even experienced investigators. Snyder and Christine fled, leaving behind a scene of staggering violence. For years, police struggled to understand who could have committed such a brutal, targeted attack. The case remained unsolved while Christine's life deteriorated. Her addiction worsened. She lived in a hotel room filled with needles. Her relationship with Snyder collapsed. She became reclusive, unstable, and consumed by fear. Then, during a television broadcast about the unsolved murders, Christine panicked. She confessed to her husband, Justin Rott, claiming Snyder had orchestrated the attack and forced her to participate. Rott went to the police. 3 years after the killings, Christine was arrested. Snyder killed himself shortly after authorities moved to arrest him, leaving Christine as the only surviving perpetrator. At trial, prosecutors portrayed her as envious, vindictive, and obsessed with the girls who once lifted her out of loneliness. They emphasized the targeted brutality, especially toward Tiffany and Rachel. They presented text messages revealing jealousy and resentment. They pointed to testimony showing how Christine's transformation from insecure teen to admired classmate had been. Guided by the very girls she murdered, Christine's defense argued she was controlled by Snyder, that she feared him, and that her drug addiction clouded her judgment. But the evidence disproved helplessness. The pattern of wounds showed intent. The behavior after the killings showed no sign of coercion, and her confession to Rott contradicted later attempts to minimize her role. In 2008, Christine Marie Paolilla was convicted of 4 counts of capital murder. Because she was a minor at the time of the crime, she was not eligible for execution. She received a life sentence with the parole eligibility after 40 years. Her crime remains one of the most haunting examples of teenage violence in American history. The betrayal at its core, the murder of the two girls who helped her become who she was, still reverberates through documentaries, interviews, and community memory. Tiffany and Rachel were not just victims. They were young women who showed compassion to someone struggling, unaware that their kindness would eventually be twisted into envy and rage. And while the Clear Lake murders horrified Texas with their sheer brutality, the next case in this documentary reveals a different kind of betrayal, one rooted not in jealousy between friends, but in a daughter's deception, and a family's trust shattered from within. November 8, 2010, Markham, Ontario. The Pan family home sat quietly on a suburban street in the Unionville area, where manicured lawns and tidy driveways suggested a life of order and calm. Inside that home lived a daughter who had spent years constructing a world of lies so intricate that even she struggled to keep track of what was real. On that night, those lies would drive her to orchestrate one of the most shocking betrayals in Canadian history. Jennifer Pan was born to immigrant parents who believed deeply in discipline, achievement, and sacrifice. Her father, Hui Han, and mother, Bich Ha, had endured hardship to build a stable life in Canada. They expected excellence in return, strong grades, musical ability, and unwavering focus. Jennifer appeared to deliver exactly that. She told them she was excelling in school, accepted into a prestigious university program, and later training to become a pharmacist. But none of it was true. Jennifer had failed subjects in high school, forged report cards, and fabricated entire academic journeys. She pretended to attend classes she was never enrolled in. She created binders filled with fake notes. She told her parents she had a degree, a job, and responsibilities she entirely invented. Her life became a performance, and the pressure to maintain it grew unbearable. When she met Daniel Wong, a young man involved in minor drug dealing, her hidden world expanded. Her parents disapproved of the relationship immediately. They tightened restrictions, monitored her phone, and banned her from seeing him. But Jennifer always found ways to reconnect. She lived two lives, the obedient daughter at home and the devoted girlfriend in secret. As the lies multiplied, the walls began to close in. Her parents eventually discovered the truth about her schooling, unraveling years of deception in a single moment. Jennifer lost their trust completely. Han and Bish imposed strict boundaries. No phone, no dating, no independence. They watched her movements closely. To Jennifer, this was suffocation. To her parents, it was correction. Daniel eventually drifted away and began seeing someone new. The thought of losing him, while trapped under her parents' rules, pushed Jennifer toward a decision that blurred into fantasy: removal. She began imagining a life without her parents controlling her, a life where she could be free of expectations and reunited with Daniel. In the months leading up to November 8, Jennifer's conversations took a darker turn. She contacted several people looking for someone to kill her father. At one point, she discussed staging her own murder so she could escape her life entirely, but those plans fell apart. Eventually, a new plan formed, one that would target both parents. On that November night, everything unfolded with chilling precision. Just after 9:30, 3 intruders entered the Pan home. Jennifer claimed later that she was taken upstairs and tied to a banister with shoelaces. But the knots were loose. Her movements were unrestricted enough that police would later question whether she tied herself. Meanwhile, downstairs, her parents were confronted and forced into the basement. Bitch begged for her daughter. Han pleaded for mercy. Neither plea mattered. Gunshots echoed through the house. Bitch was killed instantly. Han was shot multiple times, but, against all odds, survived. Jennifer called 911 with panicked cries, telling the dispatcher that robbers had broken in, tied her up, and shot her parents. Her voice trembled. She played the role convincingly enough that, at first, investigators viewed her as a traumatized victim. But then, Han woke in the hospital. Despite catastrophic injuries, he remembered his daughter walking freely around the house. He remembered her speaking softly with one of the intruders. He remembered she was not tied up. His testimony shattered the facade. Detectives examined Jennifer's phone records. They found dozens of messages with the men hired to carry out the attack. They found planning, timing details, payment arrangements, and confirmations. The so-called robbery was a staged execution. During interrogations, Jennifer's behavior fluctuated between tears and calculated explanations. She insisted she wanted only her father killed, not her mother. She insisted she was pressured. She insisted she was confused. But the evidence defied her claims. The trial became a national spectacle. Prosecutors portrayed Jennifer as a manipulator who believed murder was the only escape from the life she built on lies. They argued that she sought freedom, financial, emotional, and romantic, at the cost of her parents' lives. Her defense tried to argue emotional abuse, strict parenting, and psychological fragility. But the jury focused on the facts: planned entry, communication with gunmen, payment arrangements, and the cold, methodical nature of the attack. Jennifer was convicted of first-degree murder in her mother's death and attempted murder in her father's. She received a life sentence with no parole eligibility for 25 years. In later proceedings, portions of her conviction were reviewed, specifically the availability of lesser charges to the jury, but the attempted murder conviction remained intact. Jennifer remains in custody, still maintaining she did not intend for her mother to die. For many Canadians, the case remains unforgettable, not because of its brutality, but because of the bond it severed, the bond between a daughter and the parents who had sacrificed everything for her future. And as haunting as Jennifer Pan's betrayal is, the next case reveals yet another kind of violence, one committed not against a parent or a friend, but against strangers on a city street, in a sudden explosion of psychosis and fatal confusion. June 26, 2012. Atlantic City, New Jersey. The morning sun glinted off the glass casinos that lined Pacific Avenue, throwing bright reflections across the sidewalks where tourists lingered, shopping bags in hand. Summer was beginning to settle in. The day felt ordinary, the kind of morning when no one expects violence. But a woman named Antoinette Pelzer was already pacing the streets, drifting in and out of delusion, carrying with her a storm only she could hear. At 44 years old, Pelzer had been living in Atlantic City without stability, medication, or support. She suffered from schizophrenia that had long gone untreated. Her mother, living out of state, had tried again and again to get help for her, but Pelzer slipped through the gaps in a fractured system. She had nowhere to stay, no job, no medication. For days she survived on scraps from garbage cans and moved from shadows to street corners, her mind unraveling in dangerous ways. In her clothing, she carried weapons: scissors, a nail file, and a 13-inch kitchen knife. A short distance away, two Canadian women walked peacefully along the avenue: 80-year-old Po Lin Wan and her 56-year-old daughter, Alice May C. Leung. They were tourists familiar with the United States, gentle women who enjoyed traveling together. They carried books written by their relatives about their lives, a touching detail that would later overwhelm the courtroom with grief. As the women walked, Pelzer stared. Without warning, she rushed toward them. The first strike hit Alice. Witnesses saw the flash of metal and heard the screams ripple across the sidewalk. Pelzer stabbed again and again, driving the blade into Alice's face and chest. Po Lin tried to protect her daughter, pushing herself between them, but the attacker turned the knife on her as well. The elderly woman's strength was no match for the frenzy of blows. The attack lasted only seconds, but the violence stunned bystanders into paralysis. Then, a patrol officer saw the commotion. He sprinted toward the scene as Pelzer continued stabbing the two women. The officer tackled her violently to the ground, disarming her on the pavement. The knife clattered away. For a moment, the street fell silent, except for the sound of panicked breaths and the low groans of the victims. Paramedics rushed both women to the hospital. Doctors fought desperately to save them. But the wounds were catastrophic. Within minutes, both mother and daughter were pronounced dead. The books they had carried, stories of their family's history, their travels, their relationship, were found stained with blood. Pelzer was arrested immediately. From the moment she entered police custody, her behavior was flat, emotionless. She did not cry. She did not ask about the victims. She barely reacted as officers described what she had done. During interrogations, she drifted in and out of lucidity, sometimes responding logically, other times speaking to people only she could see or hear. Her mother later testified that she had begged mental health professionals to intervene in the months before the killing. Pelzer had been slipping deeper into delusion, talking to imaginary people, wandering the streets at night. But without consistent treatment, her condition deteriorated into the violent explosion that took the lives of two innocent tourists. In the courtroom, prosecutors presented security footage captured from two angles. The video showed Pelzer stalking, charging, stabbing, movements that looked intentional, rapid, and vicious. The prosecutor called the attack quick, brutal, and entirely unprovoked. Pelzer watched the footage of herself killing two women without visible reaction. Defense attorneys argued that she was deeply mentally ill, that she did not comprehend reality, and that she could not control her actions. They explained she believed she was defending herself from imagined threats. They described a woman lost in layers of schizophrenia that had never been properly treated. But under New Jersey law, mental illness alone does not absolve responsibility. The key question was whether she understood right from wrong at the moment of the attack. Prosecutors pointed to several details. She carried multiple weapons. She grabbed one victim's purse during the attack. Behavior consistent with opportunistic theft. She fled only when confronted by police. These actions suggested awareness. Witnesses testified about her calm demeanor afterward, which prosecutors argued showed not confusion, but cold indifference. They also brought forward her mother, who through tears acknowledged that, although her daughter was sick, she sometimes showed understanding of her own actions. The court wrestled with a painful truth. Pelzer had clearly battled mental illness, but she also displayed behaviors that indicated deliberate intent. No one doubted she was unwell, but the law required a decision based on evidence, not sympathy. Ultimately, the judge ruled that Pelzer was competent and guilty of 2 counts of murder. She was sentenced to 2 consecutive 40-year terms, a total of 80 years. With parole eligibility requiring more than 6 decades served, she would need to live past 100 to ever regain freedom. In the final moments of sentencing, the victim's family addressed the court by video. Alice's sister spoke through tears, saying she could not erase the image of their elderly mother trying to shield her daughter. The last act of a protective parent whose final seconds were filled with terror. Pelzer's mother, sobbing, apologized to the family. She said she had tried everything, that she loved her daughter but could not control her illness, that she wished with all her heart she could undo what happened, but there was no undoing this crime. 2 women lost their lives, brutally and senselessly. A family was shattered, and Pelzer herself, a woman who might have lived safely and peacefully with proper medical intervention, became responsible for a tragedy that stunned an entire city. Her case remains a stark reminder of what can happen when severe mental illness meets systemic failure. It forces questions that have no simple answers. How many warnings were missed? How many opportunities for intervention slipped by? And how many tragedies like this remain possible when vulnerable people fall through every crack? Yet, as harrowing as this public attack was, the next case in our documentary turns us away from street violence and toward a very different kind of danger. One that formed quietly behind closed doors, inside a relationship marked by jealousy, manipulation, and emotional collapse. It is a story where love became control and control became murder. October 12, 2012, Highland Heights, Kentucky. The warm autumn night hung motionless over the quiet condominium complex just a few miles south of Cincinnati. The kind of night where porch lights glowed softly and the sounds of passing cars faded into the stillness. Inside one of these condos lived a man whose life was on the brink of change. 29-year-old attorney Ryan Carter Poston, intelligent, ambitious, and by all accounts, deeply exhausted from a relationship he no longer wanted. In just a few hours, he planned to meet someone new. He had arranged a date with a former Miss Ohio contestant, a woman he hoped might represent a fresh start. But before that future could begin, the past would arrive at his door. Her name was Shayna Michelle Hubers. Their relationship had started with promise more than a year earlier. Ryan, articulate and handsome, met Shayna on social media, through mutual acquaintances. She was 20 years old, a psychology major, bright, academically successful, and eager for direction. In the early days, the couple seemed compatible. They spent time together, studied together, and supported one another through the transitions of young adulthood. But as the months passed, the dynamic changed. The relationship became unstable, marked by intense arguments, emotional volatility, jealousy, and repeated breakups. Ryan tried several times to end things. Each time, Shayna resisted with an intensity that made it almost impossible for him to walk away. She called constantly. She messaged incessantly. She showed up uninvited at his condo. She accessed his social media accounts, interrogated him about female friends, and left him feeling watched, cornered, and increasingly uncomfortable. By the autumn of 2012, Ryan had confided to friends and family that he felt trapped. He told them he wanted out. He just did not know how to detach from someone who refused to let go. On the night of October 12, he made the first definitive step toward moving on. He planned a date with Audrey Bolt, the Miss Ohio contestant. He messaged her excitedly. He shaved, dressed, and prepared to leave his condo around 9 o'clock. He never made it out the door. According to Shayna, she arrived at Ryan's home that evening to talk. What happened next is documented only through her statements that shifted repeatedly over time. But one fact is beyond dispute. At some point in that condo, Shayna retrieved Ryan's handgun, aimed it at him, and pulled the trigger. The first bullet struck him in the face. Shayna would later tell investigators that the gun went off, that she fired in self-defense, that Ryan charged at her, that she feared for her life. But the forensic evidence contradicted nearly every detail she offered. Ryan was seated at a table when the first shot hit him. The force of the bullet threw him backward onto the floor. In that moment, he was incapacitated. Yet the shooting did not end there. Shayna fired 5 more times. 2 bullets struck Ryan's torso as he lay on the ground. The remaining rounds followed in rapid succession. Her later statements included claims that she shot again, to put him out of his misery, believing he was suffering. Those claims too were inconsistent with the facts. Once the shooting stopped, Shayna waited nearly a quarter of an hour before calling 911. Her voice on the emergency recording was frantic yet strangely calculated, as if she were narrating her defense in real time. She told the dispatcher repeatedly that she had been attacked, that she had acted in fear, that she did not know what else to do. When police arrived, she cooperated. She walked outside calmly. She allowed herself to be taken to the station for questioning. And then something strange happened. Something that would become central to understanding her mindset that night. Inside the interrogation room, after officers left her alone, Shayna began to perform. She paced around the room. She danced. She sang Amazing Grace. She spoke to herself in theatrical, exaggerated tones, dramatizing her emotions as though she were on stage. She said aloud, "I did it. Yes, I did it. I cannot believe I did that." She joked about Ryan's appearance, telling officers that by shooting him in the face, she gave him the nose job he always wanted. She wondered aloud whether anyone would ever want to marry her now. She rehearsed lines about self-defense. She shifted between crying and laughing. Her behavior swung wildly between distress and self-consciousness, as if she were trying to craft the perfect narrative in real time. Investigators watched these recordings with growing suspicion. Her demeanor did not match trauma, it matched performance. During questioning, she detailed a long story of abuse, alleging that Ryan had thrown her, pushed her, and belittled her. But every person close to Ryan described the opposite. A man trying tirelessly to end a relationship with a woman who frightened him. Text messages from Ryan painted a picture of deep frustration and fear. He told friends he felt manipulated, that he could not break free, that Shayna threatened self-harm whenever he tried to leave. In truth, the imbalance of power in the relationship was reversed from what she claimed. The prosecution later argued that Shayna's motive was simple. If she could not have Ryan, no one could. Her obsession had become suffocating. The impending date with Audrey Bolt was a final tipping point, something Shayna could not emotionally tolerate. She knew Ryan was moving on. She knew he was pulling away in a way that felt permanent, and she reacted with lethal control. At her first trial in 2015, prosecutors presented Shayna as a woman consumed by jealousy and fear of abandonment. They showed messages she had sent to friends proclaiming, "I will never let anyone else have him." They played parts of her interrogation video, revealing her bizarre behavior. They brought in forensic experts who testified that the trajectory of the bullets contradicted every version of self-defense she had offered. Shayna's defense team insisted she was a battered partner acting out of fear, not malice. They pointed to her academic background in psychology, her struggles with emotional instability, and her claims of being abused. But the evidence, physical, digital, behavioral, weighed heavily against her. The jury deliberated less than 5 hours before finding her guilty of murder. She was sentenced to 40 years in prison. But the story did not end there. In 2016, news emerged that one of her jurors was a convicted felon, a clear violation of jury eligibility. On that technicality, her conviction was overturned. A new trial was ordered. The second trial, held in 2018, drew national attention. True crime followers watched closely, comparing the evidence across years. Would the same verdict be reached? Would the jury see the same patterns of obsession, control, and manipulation? The answer came swiftly. Once again, the jury found her guilty of murder. This time, the sentence was even harsher. Life in prison with the possibility of parole after 20 years. For Shayna, that meant a distant chance of release, but only after decades. Decades in which the world outside would evolve, the people she once knew would change or disappear, and the life she wanted so desperately to control would remain locked behind prison walls. Ryan Poston's family spoke often about the pain of losing a son who had worked tirelessly to build a future for himself. They described a man who was brilliant, kind, and deeply dedicated to his career. A man whose life was stolen, not in an impulsive moment, but in a calculated act by someone he had tried repeatedly to leave. For many who study the case, the tragedy lies in the clear pattern visible long before the night of the killing. A relationship filled with red flags, a man trying to escape, a woman whose identity had become entangled with control, a moment of final rejection that triggered a fatal collision. And in the aftermath of the crime, the interrogation footage became one of the most infamous examples of post-defense behavior, more revealing perhaps than the crime itself. In those recordings, Shayna exposed her inner world, a world where performance and self-pity eclipsed empathy, where the narrative she wanted to project mattered more than the man lying dead in the next room. Her story is not about self-defense. It is about self-obsession. But as disturbing as this case is, the next chapter takes us somewhere even darker, into the sterile, fluorescent corners of a hospital ward, where the most innocent lives imaginable were placed into the hands of someone trusted to protect them. What happened there would shock an entire nation and ignite one of the most polarizing debates in modern criminal history. June 2015, Chester, England. The neonatal unit of the Countess of Chester Hospital hummed with the soft, rhythmic noises unique to places where life hangs in delicate balance. Machines breathe air into lungs too small to breathe alone. Monitors blinked with steady pulses. Nurses whispered in the low, deliberate voices of people who know that sound carries differently around infants weighing little more than a pound. It was a place where science and hope met every day, where the fragility of existence was both a constant warning and a quiet miracle. And into this environment walked a nurse named Lucy Letby. She was 25 years old that summer, with a round, youthful face and a gentle manner that comforted new parents. She posed for fundraising photos, smiling beside incubators. She wrote cheerful notes to colleagues. She told friends she loved her job, that she found meaning in helping the smallest and weakest among them grow strong. But as the summer of 2015 unfolded, something terrifying began to happen in that unit. Babies who had been stable suddenly deteriorated without explanation. Resuscitation alarms pierced the air at unusual times. Infants who should have been on the path to recovery died unexpectedly. The unit historically saw only 2 or 3 deaths a year. But by the end of June, the number had doubled. Doctors raised concerns, and the hospital told them not to. At first, no one looked at Lucy Letby. She was soft-spoken, she was diligent. She volunteered for overtime, often working extra shifts to cover staffing shortages. She brought in cupcakes for birthdays and left handwritten notes of kindness in lockers. She was the type of nurse families wanted caring for their fragile newborns. Yet one disturbing consistency began to emerge. She was present at nearly every unexpected collapse. In June 2015, 4 infants collapsed under circumstances that baffled staff. 3 of them died. The lead consultant, Dr. Stephen Brary, noted the pattern and quietly mentioned it during a review meeting. But the unit was understaffed. Babies were sick. Coincidence seemed a safer explanation than suspecting a colleague. By the following year, that explanation would no longer hold. The medical records showed unexplained air in blood vessels consistent with embolisms. 2 infants suffered sudden, severe drops in blood sugar that later revealed themselves to be caused by insulin poisoning. Others collapsed with unusual skin discoloration. Families received shifting explanations: infection, complications, unexpected fragility. But nothing fit neatly into place. Meanwhile, Letby wrote in her diary about feeling overwhelmed and exhausted. She also sent messages to colleagues after each incident, narrating events almost like live commentary. Prosecutors would later call it a running blog of death, describing her texts as intrusive, curious, emotionally detached. Then came the handwritten note found in her home during her arrest, scribbled in large, uneven letters. "I am evil. I did this." Interpreted by prosecutors as a confession, she later claimed it was the expression of someone in deep emotional distress, not an admission of guilt. But long before the note emerged, her behavior had raised subtle alarms. In one instance, after a baby died, Letby texted a colleague complaining that she had not been assigned to the intensive care room. She argued she needed the assignment from a confidence point of view. The colleague responded with confusion. Why, after a death, would she be eager to return to the same room? Later that week, she took another infant to the mortuary and told co-workers it was the hardest thing she had ever done. Yet in private, she messaged friends with disturbing curiosity about the unfolding tragedies. By April 2016, another incident occurred. A baby accidentally given antibiotics not prescribed. Letby dismissed it as a minor error, but when combined with everything else, the incident looked different in hindsight. Doctors finally reached a breaking point in June 2016. Two new collapses occurred within hours of Letby returning from a holiday in Ibiza. Dr. Brary called the executive on duty and demanded she be removed from the unit. The request was denied. Administrators insisted she was safe to work, despite growing concerns. Instead, they suggested the consultants needed training in how to manage conflict. That was the moment the walls began closing in. Not around Letby, but around the doctors who tried to raise the alarm. Hospital executives apologized to her instead. They reassigned her to a patient safety office. They even required consultants to write her a letter of apology for unfair accusations. One executive reportedly told her parents that the doctors who questioned her would be dealt with. By early 2017, the tension had reached a breaking point. The regional neonatal lead advised the hospital to contact the police. On April 27th, Dr. Breary and 3 other consultants met with Cheshire Constabulary, terrified that Letby was about to return to clinical duties. When investigators pulled the medical records, they found anomalies that aligned with Letby's presence. They found unusual concentrations of insulin. They found possible air embolism cases in newborns who should never have encountered such risk. They found text messages and handwritten notes that suggested emotional entanglement with the collapses. And over the next 2 years, a task force known as Operation Hummingbird built a case that would shake the United Kingdom. Letby was arrested for the first time in July 2018, then again in 2019, and a third time in 2020, when she was finally charged with 7 counts of murder and 15 counts of attempted murder. Her trial began in October 2022 at Manchester Crown Court, one of the longest and most complex medical crime trials in British history. The infants were referred to only as Baby A through Baby Q. Their identities were protected. Their parents sat in court every day listening to details no family should ever hear. One mother recounted walking into her child's room to find blood around his mouth and Letby standing nearby. She said Letby dismissed her concerns, telling her the blood was caused by a nasal tube. Hours later, her son was dead. Letby attended the funeral. She even sent a sympathy card, one she photographed before mailing it and kept saved in her phone. Another family described how she entered their private grieving space multiple times, even after being asked to leave. Nurses testified about how she carried handover sheets home with private medical details, sheets she, Awun, was not supposed to keep. Throughout the trial, Letby maintained her innocence. She denied every allegation. She insisted she was being scapegoated for systemic failures, understaffing, poor oversight, chaotic documentation. And it was true that the neonatal unit had serious issues long before suspicions surfaced, but prosecutors argued that those issues did not account for the patterns surrounding Letby. In August 2023, the jury reached its verdict, guilty on 7 counts of murder and 7 counts of attempted murder. They could not reach verdicts on 6 additional attempted murder charges, and she was acquitted of 2 others. Letby received a whole life order, one of the rarest sentences in the United Kingdom. She would never be released. But the story did not end with her sentencing. In the months that followed, controversy erupted. Some medical experts challenged the evidence used to convict her, arguing that the medical interpretations were flawed or incomplete. Discussions spread across the scientific community, questioning whether the infant's conditions could have been explained by natural causes instead. While 2 appeals were rejected, the debate remains open, with the Criminal Cases Review Commission evaluating whether her case warrants further legal review. At the same time, inquiries revealed that warnings from doctors had been ignored for more than a year. Administrators who silenced consultants and protected Letby faced intense scrutiny. The British government launched a statutory inquiry to examine how many lives might have been saved if early concerns had been believed. To this day, the case is polarizing. To some, Letby is a serial killer in a nurse's uniform. To others, she is a symbol of flawed investigations, of systemic pressure points snapping beneath institutional fear. But for the parents whose infants died, the questions are not abstract. Their grief is not theoretical. Their lives were split into a before and an after the moment Letby walked into their children's rooms. Their stories still echo in the halls of the Countess of Chester Hospital, where the machines continue to hum, the monitors continue to blink, and the nurses continue their work, haunted by the memory of a colleague whose presence they once welcomed without hesitation. And although Letby's case stands as one of the most devastating medical crime stories of the century, the next chapter takes us somewhere far more intimate, into the home of a young woman who concealed 2 pregnancies, 2 births, and 2 deaths, leaving behind a trail of silence that would not be uncovered until her own body betrayed her. December 2017, North Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. The coastal air outside the small apartment complex was cold and still, carrying the faint scent of the ocean. Holiday lights flickered faintly on balconies as families moved through their evening routines, unaware that inside one quiet unit, a young woman stood alone in a bathroom, trembling from a secret she had carried for months. Her body was going through the final stages of labor, something she had concealed from everyone around her, her boyfriend, her mother, her co-workers, even her closest friends. No one knew she was pregnant, and in the early hours of that December day, 29-year-old Alyssa Dayvault would give birth to a child who would never take a breath. Alyssa had always presented herself as a capable, put-together young woman. She had 2 daughters from a previous relationship, a boyfriend who believed she was honest with him and outwardly lived an ordinary life. But beneath that surface, she hid struggles that were growing too heavy to contain. In her mind, acknowledging a pregnancy meant exposing mistakes, confronting reality, and complicating a life already full of stress. So, she buried it. She wore loose clothing. She denied symptoms. She shielded herself in silence. That December morning, however, the truth demanded to be born. According to her later statements, the birth happened quickly. She claimed the baby emerged with the umbilical cord wrapped around its neck, that she attempted to free it and failed, and that the infant did not cry or move. She said she panicked, that she felt faint, and that she placed the newborn into a trash bag before losing consciousness. For investigators, these details would later raise difficult and painful questions. Alyssa tied the bag, and then she placed it in her apartment's dumpster. It was a moment of unfathomable desperation, or something far darker, depending on one's interpretation of the evidence. In the days that followed, Alyssa went on with her life. She told no one. She did not seek medical care until complications from childbirth forced her to visit the hospital. Even then, she denied having recently given birth. But the body does not lie. Medical staff recognized immediately that she had delivered a baby very recently, and when they questioned her, she broke. One confession opened the door. Investigators followed quickly behind. That same December, detectives learned that a newborn child had been placed in the dumpster behind her home. They searched, but by then, the waste had already been collected and destroyed. No physical remains could be recovered. It was a detail that would weigh heavily during trial, a life erased before it could even be recorded. Then came the second secret. As authorities dug deeper, they discovered that Alyssa had concealed another pregnancy the year before, in 2017. She admitted that in that earlier case, she had also given birth alone, in her bathroom, and that she had placed that baby, a newborn girl, into a trash bag, and left her in the dumpster behind her residence. That child's remains, too, had been lost before investigators could retrieve them. 2 children, 2 pregnancies hidden, 2 births carried out in silence, within the walls of a bathroom, without the presence of anyone who might have intervened. Medical experts reviewing the second case found evidence that at least one of the infants had been alive when placed inside the sealed bag. The breathing, they explained, might have lasted only seconds or minutes, but it had happened. The infant had taken in air. It had a chance, no matter how small, to cry or move. But trapped without oxygen, it suffocated. This detail transformed the legal interpretation from concealment to homicide. Alyssa's boyfriend, unaware of either pregnancy, was devastated when he learned the truth. He had suspected nothing, not one symptom, not one sign of delivery, not one behavioral shift large enough to indicate something was wrong. To him, the revelation was not just shocking, it was shattering. Her mother, too, was blindsided. She had lived in the same home at times, unaware of the pregnancies, unaware of the secret her daughter had carried, with chilling determination. In court, she would later describe Alyssa as someone who hid her struggles deeply, someone who avoided conflict at all costs, someone whose silence could swallow entire chapters of her life. When authorities attempted to bring her to trial in 2019, Alyssa vanished. She ignored every court date. She disappeared from her home. She stopped communicating with her family. The case moved forward without her, and after several days of testimony she did not attend, a jury convicted her of 2 counts of homicide by child abuse. She was found guilty in absentia. Images of her flashed across news outlets. A warrant was issued, and then, a few days later, she walked into the police station and surrendered with little explanation. At her sentencing, the courtroom was heavy with emotion. Prosecutors described her actions as deliberate, selfish, and irreversible. They emphasized the fact that she had carried 2 pregnancies nearly to term without seeking medical care or alerting anyone. They described the infant's final moments, alone, sealed in a plastic bag, denied even the briefest chance at life. Defense attorneys argued that Alyssa had panicked, that she had suffered from denial of pregnancy, a psychological condition in which a woman refuses to acknowledge the physical and emotional reality of gestation. They said she acted under immense fear, not malice, and that her mental state required understanding rather than condemnation. But the judge saw something else in the evidence: 2 separate pregnancies, 2 separate births, 2 separate disposals, and not a single step taken to seek help or change course. He sentenced her to decades in prison, ensuring she would serve the majority of her adult life behind bars. Alyssa cried softly as the verdict was read, but those tears came too late, and for many, they came without meaning. For the 2 infants who never drew breath outside the confines of a plastic bag, there were no funerals, no graves, no names spoken in obituary notices. Their lives were reduced to forensic descriptions, written on court documents that would outlast the memory of the moments in which they existed. The community struggled to make sense of what had happened. How could someone with a home, a family, a support system, carry a secret like that alone? Was it fear? Was it mental collapse? Was it cold calculation? Many debated the answer, but none could deny the stark reality. 2 newborns died because their mother refused to acknowledge their existence until it was too late. And yet, as disturbing as Alyssa Davalt's story is, the next case in this documentary takes us far deeper into premeditation, into a crime so visceral, so complex, and so horrifying that even seasoned investigators struggled to comprehend the level of planning involved. For in the autumn of 2020, in a small Texas town near the Oklahoma border, another woman would commit an act of violence not out of panic or concealment, but out of desire. A desire to steal a life that was never hers. A desire that led to murder, mutilation, and one of the most shocking fetal abduction cases in American history. October 9, 2020, New Boston, Texas. The early morning light had only just begun to creep across the quiet streets of the small Bowie County town. The sky was still pale and hesitant, the sort of morning where most people were only just waking, unaware that a horror unlike anything they could imagine was about to unfold in one of their own neighborhoods. It was the kind of day that should have been ordinary. Children preparing for school, dogs barking at passing joggers, the rhythm of rural Texas life pulsing steadily. But inside the modest home of 21-year-old Reagan Simmons Hancock, a young mother in her 34th week of pregnancy, violence beyond comprehension was minutes away. Reagan was loved by everyone who knew her. She was warm, open-hearted, and excited to welcome her second child, a baby girl she and her husband had already named Braxlyn Sage. She posted updates about her pregnancy. She decorated the nursery. She anticipated the moment she would meet her daughter with a joy so radiant that even strangers felt it through her social media posts. But someone else was watching those posts. Someone who had built her entire existence on lies. Her name was Taylor Renee Parker. To the outside world, Taylor appeared friendly, charismatic, and endlessly confident. But beneath that facade was a history of manipulation that stretched back years. She had lied about her health, her finances, her background. She had created stories about being targeted by the Mexican mafia. She had pretended to be the wealthy heir to the Morton Salt fortune. She had a long pattern of fabricating achievements, crises, and identities. But the most dangerous lie she ever told was this. She told her boyfriend and her family that she was pregnant. In reality, Taylor had undergone a hysterectomy years earlier. She could no longer have children, yet she crafted the illusion of pregnancy with meticulous detail. She posted fake ultrasound photos online. She claimed to feel kicks. She talked about cravings. Her lies braided themselves into the expectations of everyone around her. Her boyfriend believed he would soon become a father. Her family believed a grandchild was on the way. And Taylor believed one thing above all: the lie had to become real. As her supposed due date approached, the walls of her deception began to close in. She could no longer delay the moment when people expected her to walk into a hospital and deliver a baby. And with every passing hour, her desperation grew sharper, darker, more predatory. Somewhere in the weeks before October 9, a plan formed, not suddenly, not impulsively, but as the culmination of years of compulsive lying and emotional instability. Taylor identified Reagan, heavily pregnant, vulnerable, and known to her socially. She knew Reagan's due date. She knew the layout of her home. She knew Reagan often spent mornings alone. All she needed was an opportunity. That opportunity came on the morning of October 9. Reagan's mother, Jessica, was expecting her daughter to arrive at work but received no message. A sense of unease crept in. She drove to Reagan's home, walked to the front door, and stepped inside. The sight that greeted her was worse than anything she could have imagined. Blood was splattered across the walls and floor. Furniture was overturned. A violent struggle had unfolded, one that Reagan had fought with every ounce of strength she possessed. Her body lay on the floor, covered in deep knife wounds. Her abdomen had been brutally cut open in what investigators later described as a crude, violent cesarean section. The baby was gone. It is difficult to comprehend the desperation, terror, and agony Reagan endured in those final minutes. She had been awake. She had been conscious. She had fought for her life, and she had fought for the life of her unborn daughter. But Taylor had taken that life from her. After the attack, Taylor fled the home with the premature infant in her arms. She placed little Braxlyn into her vehicle and sped north, toward the Oklahoma border. As she drove, the newborn, torn from her mother minutes earlier, struggled for life. Evidence and witness testimony later suggested that Braxlyn had been alive after being removed from Reagan's body. A fellow inmate would testify that Taylor told her she held the newborn's cheek against Reagan's lifeless face and whispered, "Tell Mama bye." Whether the baby stopped breathing in the car or before leaving Reagan's home remains uncertain, but medical personnel would later confirm that they were able to get the infant's heart beating again for a short while, meaning she had not been without circulation for long. The state argued this proved she had been born alive before being kidnapped. As Taylor crossed into Oklahoma, she was pulled over for speeding. In the passenger seat sat the infant, limp and blue. Taylor told officers she had just given birth on the side of the road, a story unraveling the second emergency responders laid eyes on her. There was no evidence of labor, no blood consistent with childbirth, no placenta, no physical trauma on Taylor's body at all. The officers immediately grew suspicious. She and the baby were rushed to a hospital in McCurtain County, Oklahoma. Staff desperately attempted to revive Braxlyn, performing CPR on the tiny child, For a few brief moments, the heart rhythm flickered back to life. But it was too late. The infant girl, whose entire existence had been built on hope, anticipation, and love, was pronounced dead. Within hours, investigators connected the newborn's death to the murder in New Boston. By afternoon, Taylor was in custody. The investigation that followed exposed the depth of Taylor's lies. Her search history included terms related to fetal development, cesarean procedures, and physical signs of labor. She had visited Reagan weeks before the attack, observing her pregnancy closely. Multiple witnesses came forward, describing Taylor's increasingly frantic attempts to maintain the illusion of pregnancy. During the trial, which stretched across weeks in 2022, prosecutors depicted Taylor as a master manipulator, driven by narcissism and desperation. They argued that her decision to kill Reagan and steal her unborn baby was planned, intentional, and rooted in a desire to preserve a fantasy life she had fabricated. They called medical experts, first responders, law enforcement officers, and even jailhouse informants to build a narrative of overwhelming evidence. One inmate testified that Taylor described the attack in chilling detail, including the moment she attempted to pass the baby's cheek across Reagan's face. Another witness described her lack of emotion in the hours following the murder. The medical testimony was among the most crucial. It confirmed that little Braxlyn Sage was born alive before her death, making her kidnapping a legal fact. Under Texas law, for the murder to qualify as capital murder, prosecutors needed to prove Taylor killed Reagan while committing another felony, and kidnapping a living infant met that requirement. Taylor's defense attempted to argue that the infant had been stillborn, that the kidnapping statute did not apply, and that Taylor herself had been overwhelmed and unstable. But the evidence was unyielding. The jury deliberated only a short time before returning with a verdict: guilty of capital murder. The sentence: death. The courtroom fell silent except for the sounds of muffled crying. Reagan's family clutched one another. Even seasoned investigators struggled to describe the emotional toll of the case. For many, this crime represented a level of brutality that shattered their understanding of human behavior. In November 2025, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals upheld her death sentence in a unanimous decision. They stated that the evidence of kidnapping was plentiful, including medical testimony, first responder observations, and witness statements, confirming that the baby had been alive after being cut from her mother. The court also dismissed Taylor's claims that media coverage had prejudiced the community, stating that nothing presented had been shown to be inaccurate or inflammatory beyond the truth of the case. For Reagan's family, the decision brought some measure of closure, though no sentence could ever bring back the daughter, mother, wife, and friend they lost. Reagan had been preparing to welcome her baby girl into the world. Instead, she was murdered in her own home by someone she knew. Someone who coveted the one thing Reagan had that Taylor never could. Even now, the case remains one of the most harrowing examples of fetal abduction in American criminal history. It is a story of deception, envy, and desperation hardened into violence. A story where the cost of a lie was two innocent lives. And yet, as horrific as Taylor Parker's crime was, the next case in this documentary takes us into the shadows of another kind of deception. One rooted not in jealousy of motherhood, but in a twisted sense of spiritual entitlement. For in the year that followed, across the ocean in London, a woman with a background in osteopathy and anatomy committed a chilling, calculated murder involving a suitcase, a forged will, and a friendship exploited to the point of horror. June 11, 2021, Willesden, northwest London. The early morning light filtered through the narrow terraced streets, casting soft shadows against rows of modest homes. London was waking slowly, unaware that inside one of these houses, a woman named Mi Quen Chong, known affectionately to friends as Deborah, was about to open the door to someone she believed she could trust, someone she had allowed into her life, confided in, and even supported financially, someone who had studied anatomy, mastered human physiology, and understood precisely how fragile the human body could be. That person was 50-year-old Gemma Mitchell. At first glance, Gemma was the kind of woman who carried herself with quiet poise. She held a degree in human sciences from King's College London. She had studied osteopathy. She had lived in large family homes in affluent areas, homes she often referenced with fond nostalgia. But behind her composed exterior was a life in disrepair, Her once grand family house had fallen into decaying clutter. Its restoration stalled due to financial strain. Debts piled up. The facade of stability she projected to the world began to collapse. And then she met Deborah. Their friendship formed through a church community, strengthened by Deborah's compassionate nature and her struggle with mental and health challenges, particularly paranoid schizophrenia. Deborah sought spiritual guidance, healing, and connection. Gemma offered all three, or appeared to. She presented herself as someone who understood suffering, who could help Deborah find balance. At first, she seemed kind, supportive, and earnest. But behind the scenes, something sinister was forming. In 2020, Deborah, in a moment of generosity, offered Gemma £200,000 to help restore her crumbling family home. It was an act of profound charity, the kind of gesture that reveals the depth of someone's heart. But when Deborah later withdrew the offer, perhaps recognizing the financial strain it placed on her own limited resources, Gemma's attitude darkened. Her frustration grew into anger, and that anger festered into something far more dangerous. By June of 2021, Gemma's life was unraveling. Her dreams of repairing the family house had collapsed. She had no stable income. She had no fiancé, despite telling others she was engaged. Her world, built partially on appearances and half-truths, was tightening around her. And on June 11, she arrived at Deborah's home carrying a large blue suitcase. That suitcase would later become the center of one of the most chilling pieces of forensic storytelling in British criminal history. What exactly happened inside Deborah's house that day will never be known with complete certainty. There were no witnesses, no recordings, no screams heard through the narrow street. But what is known is this. Sometime during that visit, Deborah died from blunt force trauma so severe that her skull fractured. One forensic expert later described the injuries as consistent with a violent blow, possibly inflicted with a weapon never recovered. Gemma, trained in anatomy and skilled in manipulating joints, would have understood exactly how much force was needed. After the killing, investigators believe she spent hours inside the house preparing the body, packing it into the large suitcase she had brought with her. She then dragged the suitcase out of the house and loaded it into a taxi. The driver remembered her struggling with the weight. He offered help. She declined. She returned home with the suitcase, storing it in her own garden shed. For more than 2 weeks, the body remained there while Gemma carried on with her life, attending appointments, sending text messages, walking through her neighborhood, all while the decomposing remains of a woman she once called a friend lay hidden behind her house. But Gemma was not finished. After holding the body for 2 weeks, she drove more than 200 miles to the Devon coast. Investigators later tracked her route through automatic number plate recognition cameras. She was seen carrying the same large suitcase into a wooded area near the seaside town of Salcombe. There, she discarded Deborah's body in undergrowth at the foot of a cliff. On June 27, 2 passers-by walking through the area made a horrifying discovery. The sight of a partially decomposed body, the skull separated from the spine, sent shockwaves through the small coastal community. Forensics quickly determined the injuries had been inflicted before death. The woman had been murdered. Back in London, detectives examined Deborah's home and found blood spatter consistent with violent force. Security cameras captured Gemma arriving at Deborah's home with an empty suitcase and leaving with it bulging. Additional footage showed her dragging the suitcase through her driveway after returning home, struggling under the weight. But perhaps the most damning evidence was found in documents. Shortly after Deborah's disappearance, Gemma had produced a forged will, naming herself the primary beneficiary of Deborah's estate. The document attempted to redirect a large portion of Deborah's assets, including her property, to Gemma. Experts quickly concluded the will was fake. The signature did not match. The language was unnatural. The sudden revision was suspicious at best, criminal at worst. By the time the forensic evidence, CCTV footage, digital data, and financial documentation were assembled, investigators saw a clear picture. Gemma had killed Deborah in an attempt to claim the money she believed she was owed. When police arrived at her home to arrest her, body cam footage captured Gemma's demeanor, calm, composed, almost serene. She told officers that Deborah had traveled to the seaside for peace and quiet, a statement almost grotesque in its cold detachment. She denied any involvement. She claimed the forged will was real. She projected an air of wounded innocence. But the evidence was unrelenting. At trial, prosecutors described the killing as premeditated and financially motivated. They pointed to her knowledge of anatomy, the lies she told about her finances, the timing of her visit, the forged documents, and the extraordinary lengths she took to hide the body. The suitcase, the drive to Devon, the staged disappearance. Each step of her plan revealed a chilling level of calculation. Gemma's defense argued she was misunderstood, that the death was accidental, that she panicked. But the injuries told another story. Deborah's skull had been struck with enough force to fracture it in multiple places. Forensic anthropologists testified that the damage could not have occurred from a simple fall. It required intentional violence. The jury agreed. In October 2022, Gemma Mitchell was found guilty of murder and sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 34 years. She became the first woman in the United Kingdom to have her sentencing televised, a moment that allowed the public to witness the full gravity of her actions as the judge delivered his remarks. The judge called her actions cold-blooded, driven by self-interest and greed. He emphasized that she had treated Deborah's body with inhuman disregard, storing it like an object and discarding it far from home, robbing her family of the chance to grieve properly. Deborah's loved ones described her as gentle, generous, and vulnerable, someone who had trusted Gemma in good faith. They mourned not only her death, but the betrayal at its core. And yet, as shocking as this case is, the next chapter in this documentary turns once again from financial motive to emotional volatility, to a killing born not from premeditated greed, but from jealousy, obsession, and a fascination with violence itself. For in the summer of 2022, a young woman living in Hampshire surrounded herself with images of serial killers, weapons, and fantasies of domination. Until one night, she acted on those fantasies in a burst of lethal rage. In July 17, 2022, Havant, Hampshire, England. A still, warm night lingered over the small residential street in Havant, where the houses sat close together and porch lights glowed faintly in the summer haze. Inside one of these homes lived a 26-year-old woman named Shay Groves, a woman whose interior world was far darker than the quiet suburban setting around her suggested. Her bedroom walls were lined with framed portraits of serial killers. Knives rested in display cases. A katana sword leaned against the wall. Her fascination with violence was not a secret. It was the aesthetic foundation of her life. Her boyfriend, 25-year-old Frankie Fitzgerald, had spent the night at her home. Their relationship had begun months earlier, intoxicating at first, built on shared sexual exploration and compulsive emotional intensity. But beneath the excitement was a growing instability, jealousy, surveillance, and obsession that neither of them knew how to control. By the morning of July 17, Frankie would be dead, and Shay Groves would spend the next 48 hours constructing a story to hide a crime she later claimed was self-defense. The night before, neighbors heard nothing unusual. There were no screams, no sounds of struggle. But inside Shay's bedroom, a confrontation was unfolding, one rooted in accusations, fueled by jealousy, and filtered through Shay's increasingly distorted perception of control. According to her later statements, she believed Frankie was cheating on her. She claimed she saw messages on his phone that confirmed her fears. She said he humiliated her, spoke down to her, and threatened to leave. What is known for certain is that at some point during the early hours of the morning, she took a knife from her collection. She stabbed him multiple times. The ferocity of the attack was unmistakable. Frankie sustained more than 17 stab wounds, many of them to the neck and chest. Some were inflicted with such force that they penetrated bone. Experts would later testify that the pattern and depth of the wounds indicated rage, not self-defense. A deliberate, repeated assault rather than a single act of desperation. But what Shay did after the killing was perhaps even more chilling. She stood over his body. She smoked a cigarette. She took a photo of the scene, a grotesque still image of the aftermath, and sent it to a friend. She FaceTimed another friend, showing Frankie's body on the floor. On that call, she was calm, composed, even conversational. She asked her friend to bring over cleaning supplies. She asked for help deciding what to do with the body. She explained that she intended to claim self-defense, crafting the narrative before anyone else knew what had happened. Her friend, horrified, urged her to call the police. Shay refused. Instead, she spent the next day cleaning the room. She searched online for terms like how to clean blood from carpet. She tried to create an alibi, telling others that Frankie had left her home alive. She rehearsed variations of her story. He attacked her, he choked her, she feared for her life, but the forensic evidence dismantled every version she offered. There were no signs of defensive wounds on her body. There were no objects in the room, displaced in the way one would expect from a life-and-death struggle. And most damning of all, the knife wounds showed angles consistent not with a person fighting upward from the floor, but with someone standing over the victim, attacking downward. Her social media presence became part of the case as well. The prosecution presented messages Shay had sent to friends long before the killing. Messages gushing over female killers she idolized, praising their sense of power. They pointed to her collection of serial killer art, her obsession with control, and her fascination with sadistic themes. They argued that these behaviors were not harmless quirks, but indicators of a deeper pathology. And they presented the chilling fact that she reenacted one of the wounds using her katana sword, practicing the motion afterward with a disturbing level of composure. The days following the killing were filled with bizarre attempts to manipulate perception. Shay tried to stage the scene. She sent messages from Frankie's phone to make it appear he was still alive. She told others he had walked out after an argument. She researched how long it took for bodies to decompose. She even considered dismembering him, though she ultimately abandoned the idea. But the lies collapsed when her friend contacted the police. Officers arrived at Shay's home on July 19, 2022. The smell of bleach hung in the air. Blood had soaked into the carpet. A knife lay nearby. Frankie's body remained where she had left it. When they asked her what happened, she launched into her rehearsed defense, that Frankie had attacked her in a violent rage, that she had managed to grab the knife and protect herself. But investigators quickly noted the inconsistencies. The scene was too organized. Her demeanor was too controlled, and the evidence simply did not reflect defensive action. At trial, held in early 2023, prosecutors described the killing as an act of jealousy and domination. They played recordings of Shay laughing during the FaceTime call with her friend. They presented evidence of her online searches. They displayed photos of the serial killer portraits lining her bedroom walls. They showed the jury the knife collection, the sword, the reenactment. They argued that the killing was not sudden or impulsive. It was the culmination of a woman who romanticized violence and saw herself as the central figure in her own dark fantasy. Shay's defense team insisted she was a victim of domestic abuse, that Frankie had strangled her, that she feared he would kill her. They pointed to messages showing arguments and emotional turbulence between the pair. They argued that Shay's mental state, shaped by trauma and insecurity, created a genuine belief that she needed to defend herself. But the evidence spoke louder. In February 2023, after hours of deliberation, the jury returned with a verdict: guilty of murder. Shay was sentenced to a minimum of 17 years in prison. The judge described the killing as violent and manipulative, emphasizing the disturbing lack of remorse and the elaborate steps she took to conceal the crime. Frankie's family, devastated, used their victim impact statements to paint a picture of a young man whose life was stolen by someone he believed he loved. They spoke of his kindness, his humor, his dreams, and the unbearable pain of losing him in such a brutal way. For them, the case was not about psychological nuance or criminal fascination. It was about the loss of a son, a brother, a friend. Shay's story remains one of the most chilling modern examples of how obsession, fantasy, and jealousy can twist someone's reality into lethal distortion. It is a case where violence was not only committed, but curated, photographed, displayed, and rehearsed, as though the killer saw herself as both director and star in a gruesome performance. In every case we explored, the darkness did not come from strangers in the shadows, but from women living ordinary lives until something inside them broke past the point of return. Their choices shattered families, rewrote futures, and left investigators facing horrors no one could have predicted. These stories remind us how thin the line can be between trust and danger, between love and violence, between the life someone shows the world and the one they hide. Thank you for watching this investigation. If you liked it, please subscribe. because the next story might be closer than you think.